Joining us now, WDRB.com's Rick Bozich. How are you doing on this Friday, Rick?
I'm good, John. We got a little rain outside, so I had to cut the walk short this morning.
I know, and all this wind we've gotten over this entire year so far. I saw we're supposed to get close to 40 to 50 mile per hour winds again tonight.
I know. I already survived 4 days without power. I hope it doesn't happen again.
Yep, definitely not something you'd want to have to deal with more than once, hopefully, in a year. Jim, are you back with us?
I am, sir. How are you?
We're good, Jim. How are you?
Wonderful. We were talking a second ago. I'm sure you're excited as can be. Yesterday, opening day of baseball, and the Sox had a nice opener.
Yeah, they beat the Astros 3-2. We're down 1-0 in the eighth and came back and won, which is something that they rarely did last season. I'm only on like 3 White Sox group texts, so it's very exhausting at night in a close game.
Oh, man. And I did not get to hear Ozzie Guillen afterwards, daggone it. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah. He wasn't on. The game was on ESPN, so there wasn't a post-game show, but Ozzie will check in for this first show tonight. So,
Ozzie, yeah. I can't. I've got to wait till I get a good some good content to do an impression of him. Plenty going on in the world of sports right now, man. I mean, it doesn't matter where you turn. Of course, we've got the NCAA Final Four on both men's and women's this weekend. The women's, of course, start tonight. The men's tomorrow. News going around the portal. Indiana, of course, with a lot of faces that they have to fill. They've got Jordan Sparks already locked in from Ball State, which looked to be a pretty good pickup. Although, man, that 52% the free throw line, that's hard to take. But they've got more faces to fill, and they're just. I'd sent out a tweet, maybe Indiana will have at minimum 3, possibly 4 new starters that are not even on the roster yet. And this was before they picked up Sparks, but and I believe that to be true still.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was interesting to me when I covered the regional here last week, and the South Regional was here, and looking at San Diego State, which ended up winning it. The most outstanding player in the regional here, it wasn't Brandon Miller. It wasn't Ryan Kalbrenner of Nebraska, of Creighton, who's a very highly touted player. It wasn't Noah Clowney, the guy that IU tried to get who went to Alabama. It was the guy by the name of Darian Trammell. And nobody's heard of him. You probably still haven't heard of him. He had a big game when they won their opener against Alabama, and then he made the winning free throws to beat Creighton. And went back and looked. He played his first 2 years at Seattle, and I went back and looked at the rankings in the transfer portal a year ago. He wasn't ranked one of the top 300 transfers available last year. He's the most outstanding player in the South Regional. So, there's good players out there. You just have to pick the right ones that fit your system. And I think what we're also seeing this year in the tournament, in the men's tournament, older guys are more likely to contribute than younger guys. Because when San Diego State won that game against Alabama, the Alabama dudes were definitely more talented, but 3 of them were freshmen. And I think that physically they weren't ready for the game, and mentally they weren't ready for the game.
I agree. Absolutely. And it's just Indiana has to have a complete roster overhaul.
Right.
It's going to be a completely different offense. I think people will see next year because it's going to be the first time in years that the offense has not gone through Trace Jackson Davis.
Yeah, that's the only interesting thing about the Sparks. I like the Sparks edition because I think he's a big physical kid who'll fit in well in the Big Ten. I think with Cliff Marshall, he'll probably get in a little bit better shape and be a little bit more explosive athlete. He wanted to come to Indiana, which is a big factor. But my concern with him is he's pretty much basically just a low post player. And if you're going to try and play differently, that means when he's on the floor, the best way to use him would be to have 4 guys on the outside. And I'm curious on how he fits with Malik Renault. I, I'm hoping that Mike Woodson doesn't go with 2 low post guys again and does embrace the modern style of basketball of having more guys who can drive it, shoot it, and pass it.
Yeah, that was a thought because, again, I mentioned a minute ago, he's a 52% free throw shooter, so I don't know what kind of range that he has, but he is a different kind of player than Trace was as far as he seems more he's more athletic, and not to say that Trace wasn't athletic, but he's more versatile, I guess. His range is a little bit more. Does that make sense?
He's broader. It seems like he's bigger. This is a bad comparison, but the guy that he reminded me of, and he's not nearly as good a player. Remember Zach
Thomas Bryant? Oh, I was going to say Thomas. I've been comparing him to Thomas Bryant.
Okay. I guess because he's left-handed, I compared him to Zach Randolph in terms of how big and physical he is. And Zach Randolph is obviously a better shooter who played in the NBA for a long time. He's no Zach Randolph. But that's the kind of guy he's got. He does a lot of pivoting down in the post. Trace was a better passer for sure, better shot blocker, could jump higher, run faster, those things. He's not going to be Trace Jackson Davis. But he can be an effective player if he's used the right way. And I've seen the thing about the free throw shooting, but I guess what I would say is the year before, on nearly as many attempts, he shot 70%. So, you got to figure that his realistic percentage is going to be somewhere in the 60s, and maybe he can get better at that.
Absolutely. The style of play that Indiana really has to go to, it's more athleticism.
Right.
It's less a style, I guess you'd say. It's not so much any style of offense. It's the ability to run the offense and to run an offense that they need to run. And you mentioned and hit a key word that I've been talking about. It's getting the right players. It's getting the right guys, because as much as and as beloved as some of the guys were on the Indiana team that just left, Indiana fans don't like to hear it. But there were players in this group of 6 that have left, or however many it was total, that did not either have what it took to win, didn't know what it took to win, or wasn't willing to give what it took to win. It was one of the 3 that affected all of those guys, and you can't win with players like that. And I know from talking to from people that close enough that there were just guys that didn't want to do it. And I'll go right to Mike Woodson's statement that he made on TV during the NCAA, talking about his guys whining and complaining. Right. That goes right to what I'm talking about. Instead of, you can just look at Miami, I guarantee you they weren't complaining. They were saying we're kicking their ass. That's what they were thinking. And that's the kind of guys you need. It doesn't matter what's on your jersey. You should always think and play that way. And that's what Indiana has not had over the last 6 years, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you were there in Albany, and my takeaway from the first 5 minutes of that game was Indiana looked around like, man, these dudes are pretty good. They're kind of quick. They're playing hard. What are we going to do about it? It's like, well, you got to do the same thing. I mean, I didn't think as hard and as determined as they looked at the start of the Kent State game. I think in the Miami game, it was like, well, we're going to get to it in a few minutes, but right now we're kind of feeling it out. And it was like Miami was all out aggressiveness, and that put Indiana in a position where they were playing uphill the whole night. And I'd also say the other thing of they have to get more athletic defensively, especially in the backcourt. There were too many games this year, Penn State, Iowa, Miami for sure, where the opposing guards dictated the tempo and Indiana couldn't stay in front of them. And that's where they really miss Xavier Johnson. He's the first man to set the tone on defense, and they didn't have a guy like that this year who could make the opposing point guard uncomfortable. And so I think you saw a lot of games where opposing guard Northwestern's another one where the opposing guards just went off on Indiana. I mean, how many teams had guards that probably had their best games of the year against Indiana?
Exactly, and those are the kinds of games that they can't win in the NCAA tournament.
Right. Yep. Now you got one thing we do have to say out of fairness is Miami has turned out to be a pretty good team.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that. They're playing. They're playing at a level that they haven't played at. I mean, I don't know if it's from playing in the ACC, which was one of the weaker leagues this year. Maybe you're not as fired up from game to game because you're not as playing as big a teams or what. But they won the ACC. A lot of people.
Yeah, they were the number one seed in the ACC, no doubt about it. And I saw them play Louisville in the year. They beat them by 30, and I know Louisville wasn't very good, but they beat them by 30. And then the thing that threw you off about Miami is Maryland beat them by 18 early in the year. They lost to Georgia Tech, probably the third worst team in the ACC. But down the stretch, they were really good. And now, you say they beat Indiana, but they back it up by beating Houston by double figures and beating Texas. When you take out the 1 and 2 seed, you're good.
Yeah, it always works. Now going forward, Indiana how quickly do they have to get this done? Because the portal is an ongoing thing, and they have, like I said, you've got Gabe Cup, Ja'Kai Newton, and now Jordan Sparks coming in. So they still have 3 more spots they have to fill. Is the guy that they want out there yet?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've read, obviously they're talking to the kid from Harvard, Ledlam. Is it Timberlake, the guy from Towson? It seems like he's got a million opportunities, though.
The guy from Wyoming.
The guy from Wyoming, the guy from Virginia, the guy from Minnesota. They've got a lot of lines in the water. Caleb Love, I guess, is a possibility. There's going to be more guys go in the portal, I think, after the Final Four. I don't think there's any doubt about that as teams kind of get back together and have their end of the season meeting with coaches at more and more schools. More guys will go in the portal every day. I think you have to decide in the guys you're chasing, do you really have a legitimate chance, or you're wasting your time? And if you're wasting your time, you have to move on to the next guy. And I think, also I think we need to be fair and say that I think Malik Renew can be a really good player. I think Caleb Banks can be a really good player. DJ Gunn we didn't see as much of, but he's got good credentials, and he's going to have to shoot the ball better than he did this year. I think he can be a productive player. So, that's one thing I'm curious about is like when you bring in these new guys, how does that affect Banks and Gunn if they see that they're recruited, over?